clock by the official clock on the wall. Call to order the meeting of the Board of Water Commissioners for Thursday, July 21st, 2016. Roll call.
Okay. Commissioner Keller?
Present.
Commissioner Kilborn?
Here.
Commissioner Davis?
Here.
Commissioner Jordan?
Here.
Commissioner Bernie?
Present.
Full house.
Do you have any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Chair Keller, I would like to remove item 7A. We have some new information that came in this week, and we're not ready to talk on that one today.
Thank you. I have one request to speak from the public. This is item number 4, public comment from Denise Spangler Adams, which is during the public comment period. So, Ms. Adams.
Good morning. I'm Denise Spangler Adams. I live at 350 Calle Elegante. I'm a lot out of the city boundaries, but I've been a water service customer of yours since 1980. And when my property was developed, I was told I would have city water. I came here today just to give you an update. We don't need to discuss my particular case because it's now at the city attorney's office. I have very legitimate concerns about my property, and they are deeded to my particular lot when it was approved by the Planning Commission and the city as the lead agency. So the city attorney will take care of me. However, I'd like to request that at some juncture you coordinate the water board with the planning commission so that when you put stipulations on approvals or they put stipulations on approvals, they run with the land. I'm in a special treatment area like Sycamore Canyon that if the hill's not held, we have soil liquefaction, our expansion contraction 7 inches. We have all kinds of problems. If that hill falls, we've got problems on Barker Pass Road, and there are specific conditions. It turns out when I met with people at the county recorder's office, what you require or the planning commission requires, even though you state it's to run with the land, all the new property owners aren't getting this information. I'm one of 3 of the last original owners from 1985. The rest, one is in escrow now. She just moved to Val Verde. The other man's 84 years old. I happen to be 64. What happens when people then see advertisements that say we need to protect our underground water basement, take out all these hard surfaces and put in permeable surfaces, and then our hill collapses because we have sinkholes or whatever, and they are uninformed, underinformed, because the stipulations you and planning put on it don't run with the land as per the deed. So an issue today, the Planning Commission's meeting at noon. I would again hope that there could be some coordination between the two of you. And my second issue, which I've already raised to you, when you set the rates, I think that special treatment areas, especially those in high fire areas, special treatment areas where we have major soil problems. I'm on a 42% slope. Is mine, like this, and my hill will come down. I cannot afford to water my property with the 130% surcharge, which I was told when I bought the land. I was never told I'd have 130% surcharge. With the rates going up, do they come down when the desal plant's finished and operational? I paid for the first desal plant. I'm now paying for the second desal plant. In order to maintain my hill, my bills would run about $1,200 a month. So again, we don't need to get into the specifics of my situation, but if you're going to designate property special treatment areas, if in fact you're going to approve building, which I would advise you not approve building, because your information just does not go to new owners. And if we're there, please help us, because I'm not the only one in my neighborhood who can't handle it. And what's happening is going to be a long-term adverse impact for Santa Barbara. You're going to have all basically foreign-owned properties by the Chinese, because that's what's coming into my area, Chinese in Morocco and the Middle East, because people here can't afford the properties anymore, and we can't afford the water rates. So thank you for your time, and I hope there'll be increased coordination and some discussion of rates for special treatment areas in the high fire zone that you specifically designated and required us to post a $24,000 bond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spangler. Item number 5 is appointment of officers. Listed Joshua Hagmark. Mr. Hagmark.
Yep, it's that time of year again when look to the Water Commission to appoint the next chair and vice chair.
And for new commissioners, our custom for many years has been that the person who's the vice chair gets elected chair and someone else moves into the vice chair position. So in keeping with that, I'll nominate Mr. Kilborn for Chairman. Megan?
I'll second the nomination. I'd also like to nominate Dave Davis for vice chair.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have nominations for both offices. We can probably elect both of them in one fell swoop. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So carried unanimously. And with that, I will hand this over to Mr. Kilborn.
Passing the torch already.
That's right. There you go. Let's do this officially. Oh, this is even more complicated. You can pass that one down. He doesn't have a double-decker.
Oh, yeah, we need a double.
This is more complicated than we... All right. Boy. All this on television. Go ahead.
All right, well, with that, we will move on to consent item A and B. We have the meeting minutes and the response to the grand jury report regarding the Lake Cachuma minutes.
And we had a...
Chair, I'd like to pull item 6B off of consent, please.
Okay. We also had a comment from the audience. Mr. Chris Dahlstrom, would you like to say a few words?
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Chris Dahlstrom. I'm the General Manager of the Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District Improvement District Number 1. I have to apologize. I read all of this morning and realized the Commission was meeting at 8 o'clock rather than 10 o'clock, so I had to shake the cobwebs out a little bit. I've been before the Commission years ago. Mr. Keller was on that commission in 1988 or 89 when I worked here.
88.
1888? Okay. That makes us really old. So at that time in 1988-89, the desal plant was also in the planning works. I was a part of the city staff here working on that. But that's not why I came to speak to the commission. All of us as Cachuma project member units have to respond to the grand jury report that was produced related to the Cachuma project, and as it's called, I believe it's paper water, can't drink paper water. Some of the comments the city provided have a tone that would affect and could create some potential conflict with the downstream users of the Cachuma project, meaning those water rights holders, and some of the comments in the responses, or some of the responses in the comments to the grand jury, also could incite internal conflict between the agencies or the Cachuma member units. In 1993 to 96, I was involved in the Cachuma project contract renewal as the coordinator for that activity between the Bureau of Reclamation and the County Water Agency, as well as the Cachuma project member units. At that time, it was a very cohesive group. All of us as Cachuma member units had one goal in mind, and that was to protect the water supplies that were contract water supplies for the Cachuma project, as well as balancing some of the activities at that time that were both downstream and as well some of the public trust resources or the natural resources downstream and then lake. Some of the comments, as I mentioned, I'd like to specifically address, if I can, very quickly here. I have it In item 1, in recommendation 1A, or response to the grand jury, the city identifies the project yield, in particular the groundwater inflows into the Tecolote Tunnel. Now, part of the Kachuma project available supply and its operational yield that's calculated and determined for the annual use, the tunnel is included in that, the tunnel inflow. And the reason why was that when that tunnel was constructed in the early 50s, that actually dried up springs and flow into the watershed of the San Ynez River. So as a accommodation, that tunnel yield was also included in the total yield for all the Kachuma project member units, including ID1. Now, to indicate that ID1 needs to pay for the tunnel, this is a long debate. ID1 does not get its deliveries from the Tecolote Tunnel. The Tecolote Tunnel is for the conveyance of water to the south coast. Not to mention, the capital component of the Kachuma project has been paid off as of September, it would be 2015, it was paid off. So to imply that in this response, that ID1 should pay the ongoing cost of the Tecolote Tunnel is something that will bring up potential conflict during the contract negotiation time, which will begin very shortly. At least it's been initiated. So that's one item that I'd like to bring the attention to the Commission. We do encourage a safe yield change because the conditions of the Kachuma project in 1995 and 96, when the contract was signed, has changed dramatically with the Endangered Species Act and the implementation of the biological opinion by the Bureau of Reclamation. On finding 2, there's discussion about the settlement agreement that was signed in 2002. Now, the settlement agreement is and has been before the State Water Resources Control Board since 2003. The State Board has not acted since that time in 2003. It's part, and when the State Board does act, that won't be within the water rights order, but it'll be recognized as an agreement among the parties. Now, this 2002 settlement agreement settled a number of issues in the San Ynez River. It was about 50 years of conflict and a lawsuit that was pending with the city of Lompoc against the South Coast users, or against the Kachuma project. So that settlement agreement did a lot to bring peace and order on the river, and to have this as a comment to the grand jury, again, incites the potential for disagreement in the San Ynez River and the South Coast. I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention, or to the Commission's attention. There are portions of the settlement agreement that are being implemented as a good faith measure. For instance, the 65 days of downstream water rights releases as applies to fisheries activities. So it takes the place of water that would be otherwise released from the Kachuma project for fisheries and out of the project yield as contract water. Another item is the bank storage. The bank storage has always been a calculation in the downstream water rights above and below Narrows accounts, particularly the above Narrows accounts. To want to change that will certainly bring an issue to the downstream water users, and particularly the downstream water rights orders. Again, this is the Kachuma project contract as it stands now. I-75R 1802R recognizes the downstream water rights. Those water rights preceded the Kachuma project and were a condition of the Kachuma project being built to make sure that those water rights were held in perpetuity and protected as well. The last comment I'd like to make is related to fish water. Of course, because of the biological opinion in 2000, that's an opinion that was issued by the National Marine Fisheries Service to the Bureau of Reclamation. It impacts all of the Kachuma project users, and ID1 has been a staunch supporter of maintaining only what is required in the biological opinion. And we have, for months and years, indicated that there has been too much water released for fish. And now to read this, that the fish water should be involved in the master contract, that is really a separate matter. That is under the biological opinion, which as Kachuma member units, that we should continue to be very strongly united related to the biological opinion that will be coming out, and to make sure that we protect the water supplies and preserve those for the reasons of health and drinking water to each of the parties that are contractors. It's ironic that the city is taking this position, indicating that the fish releases are too much, when in fact we've sent letters to the Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board, who is actually conducting fisheries activities that endorse more water downstream. And we, as ID1, have received letters from the Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board attorney that we are wrong in what our position is to be opposed to many of those additional and over releases of water for fish, because that is now, the San Ynez River has been a warm water species because of the drought conditions, but there's been 1 year of water released for fisheries since 2011. I don't want to take any more time, but I would ask the Commission to look very closely at these comments and really consider the implications and the unintended consequences of the comments that may put the users in the river, the downstream water rights users, and a contractor as ID1 against the city, or against this type of comments that will be provided to the grand jury. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Nope, I guess. Any questions? No? Okay. I'm sure there'll be further discussion as this thing continues to move forward, but okay. So we're pulling 6B from the consent agenda. I'm sure we'll continue to discuss this moving forward. So I guess we have approval of the meeting minutes on the consent. Do I have a nomination to approve?
Move approve. Second.
Mr. Chair, so I just have a question. We're pulling 6B, but is that still going to council on that date?
It is still planned for August 2nd, and we're looking for any comments that the commission might have on this document for us to take into consideration and pass along to council.
But you're pulling that item from our agenda?
No, they're pulling it for discussion. I believe that's what
Usually on this, you
Commissioner
pull it for
Bernie meant.
discussion, have that discussion, and then at the end, basically, then motions on either item.
That's correct.
Who motioned on the minutes for first?
I did. Sorry. But then again, we should have the discussion on the pulled item on item B before we actually get to the vote.
That's correct.
Okay. Are we moving that to further discussion?
I think Commissioner Bernie wanted to comment.
Okay, we can move that to
Yeah,
administrative items. Okay. That will become 7C now. How's that sound?
I mean, it's fine to actually the consent calendar to explain. It is somewhat confusing as it works with council, who has also a consent agenda. There are items that are put on there at the discretion of the commission. You can pull any of those and pull them off and just discuss them and add any comments to them.
You have a separate vote.
And then you can vote separately or vote together. Depends on how it all.
So I think what would be we could do with your permission is we could go ahead and act on the minutes, and then just have the discussion and act separately on item B, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
That sounds great. Okay, so we have a first and a second on the meeting minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Minutes are approved. Okay, now we can discuss 6B.
Thank you. I had a few questions following up. Starting with items 3A and 3B, I'm hoping to better understand. It seems like if we're looking at the changing the these contracts, it would seem to make sense if we're trying to allocate where the water is going, that we would take into account water being released for fish releases and such. So I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I just don't understand why we wouldn't want that in there so that we all knew how much water was going to be released going forward for the fish releases.
I think when raising this, we wanted to make sure that there was flexibility in the contract, because we understand that the biological opinion, whether we have a new biological opinion by the time, hopefully by 2020 we have something for that, but it's something that we can adapt the master contract to recognize whatever the requirements are in the biological opinion.
So then, versus saying that we shouldn't be, I don't know, I guess that maybe could be more clear in our comments then, that we need to be responsive to the biological opinion without fixing a set amount. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Bernie.
That was maybe not all that clear. And then, let's see, I had a couple more. 5B. It's talking about revising safe yield, which it sounds like everybody agrees with, which is great, and only making changes if there is new information available. And that just felt a little soft to me. I felt like we should maybe define what type of information we were looking for, or what those guidelines would be around when we would actually reassess the safe yield, because there's always going to be new information available, but what actually are we looking for? I think it would be very helpful for those not necessarily in water every single day to have a little bit more of a understanding of what type of information we'd be looking at.
I think that's the intent, is what we're trying to get away from is this hard date that has to be redone, because obviously our long-term water supply plan would be impacted by it, and we basically have to throw out everything we've done because of these changes. And so wanting to be more surgical about it, I think that's kind of the point here, is we want to develop something that is somewhat flexible. So if a new biological opinion comes out, it's an opportunity to reopen or to start discussions about it, but not maybe. So we do a new bathymetric survey, and it says that the reservoir dropped by 5,000 acre feet. Now we have to redo all the modeling, and therefore everybody has to redo all of their long-term water supply. That's what we kind of wanted to kind of set some thresholds, and I think that needs to be developed during the contract renewal.
Yeah, I guess that's exactly my concern, is by saying just new information, anyone could say, oh, we've got new information, we need to do a new thing. Okay. So it would trigger that more than being more strategic about what types of information, or what, or maybe even if it's a percentage of how much has changed. I'm not a water scientist. I don't know the best way to do that, but it just seems like this is opening it up for every single year somebody saying, hey, we've got new information, we need to change it.
Yes, I will. We'll add some language in there to clarify that we need to develop what that a criteria for the new information that would trigger it.
Okay. And then in finding a recommendation 6, and this could just be my reading of it, essentially in recommendation 8A and 8B, we talk about how the city and honestly all the different agencies need to be able to manage their water, of course, according to usage, according to supply. And it seemed like to me that language should also be included in recommendation 6, or our comments on recommendation 6 as well. Again, just because we never know what's going to happen in a given year. We could have a year that our groundwater pumps all fail, and so we need to pull more from Cachuma than was planned, and we don't want Cachuma, we don't want the Santa Barbara County Water Agency saying we can't do that if we know the next year we're going to be making up for it. So it just felt like we maybe were missing that in 6.
Okay.
And I think those were my major comments. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Go ahead. I want to go just a little bit higher. We have some testimony this morning. Some of us received a letter from former Commissioner Ruiz. Raising the basic thing is some of the issues that we have here, from bank storage to the Tecolote Tunnel issue to even the fish water, raises unintended consequences that could cause conflict with downstream users or the other member agencies. I'd just like to hear from staff, because you've heard, you know those issues, you know those comments. What your response is in terms of whether it's appropriate at this time to raise those issues without more information, without more specificity. What your thoughts are?
Our thought process when we were putting this together certainly wasn't conflict, but to put all the cards on the table and discuss all the issues is really what we wanted to get at. I feel like what we hear often is the inequities that are going one way, but not the other inequities that go the other way. There's certainly a lot of discussion about how the current master contract doesn't protect downstream water rights adequately or respect downstream water rights. And so wanting to kind of add to that discussion some of the other imbalances of water that go the other way. Not the sense that we have to see change in this, but in order to kind of show that when we look at the big picture, yeah, there's inequities that go both ways in this agreement. And I don't think there will ever be this perfect contract where everyone gets everything they want. And so just talk about all the different demands. I mean, the one thing that Mr. Dahlstrom had raised, which I think is a valuable point, that before Tecolote Tunnel went in, there were springs that went to the San Ynez River. But keep in mind, the Tecolote Tunnel is 7 miles long, and there are numerous faults. So there's also water in that tunnel that never would have went to the San Ynez River, would have gone actually towards the coastal South Coast, just based on geology. And so to put that on the table, maybe the discussion is, yeah, there's a portion of that water that certainly would have gone to the San Ynez River, and yes, there should be a share of that. But then there's water that never would have went there, and should that also be part of that shared cost, given that there is no participation in the financial cost of that tunnel? And so just wanting, again, putting all these cards on the table, an opportunity to talk. There was no intent here to start any type of war or anything else. I think all of this, and I believe the ID1 and their board, and so does the San Ynez Water Conservation District, they do the same thing. They put all these issues that for them are inequities going their way. And so the attempt was not to try and create conflict, but to just get all the cards on the table, understanding that at the end of the day, we're all going to have to try and find compromise in order to move forward. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, first I'd like to thank Mr. Dahlstrom for coming and sharing his comments. He clearly remembers a lot of the situation even much better than I do. And regarding the Tecolote Tunnel, I am a water scientist, and without having had a very detailed study prior to the building of the tunnel in 1952, we would never really be able to resolve how much water would have gone either to the South Coast or the San Ynez River, but undoubtedly some of it goes each way. And I think that it's important that we really consider what the city's comments are and try to avoid conflicts. And also, I don't understand why the grand jury got involved with this at all, or what power they have to enforce anything. So the whole process is somewhat mysterious to me, and I don't know whether we're arguing about something that really makes sense, or it makes a difference, or is just sort of another thing thrown in to argue about. Thank you.
Any other comments?
No, I just comment on Commissioner Keller's comment. Having been involved in many grand jury reports, they don't really have any power. But it does basically put a voice to an issue, and in this particular case, doesn't resolve anything. And I think some of the concerns which have been raised is the unintended consequences of raising red flags too early in the game, and that's probably a concern. So, Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate for us to perhaps ask
staff to reconsider the tenor of some of these things to try and make sure that we're being as cooperative as possible in the language?
Diplomatic.
Diplomatic.
I think that sounds appropriate. So, and I also do know there is a timeline to respond to this. We have until August 16th, 17th to respond. So this does need to get to council and get their approval and move ahead too. So,
Well, I would move that council or that staff give it another look, perhaps circulate that to the Water Commission, and we can briefly review it. And as Mr. Davis suggests, this may not have a whole lot of weight in the long run, but we want to avoid getting into little shouting matches or something like that over something that really not that important. So that's a motion that we get another pass at this.
I'll second it.
okay. All in favor?
Mr. Chair, I just,
Yes.
I understand what you're saying too, and I'll support that, but I think part of that could just be accomplished with another paragraph in the preamble of the staff report that adds a paragraph, what Mr. Hagmart just said, that it was just an effort to level the concerns on both sides, because you just continually hear the concerns from one side, and this is more of an educational set of recommendations about the issues that are also pertaining to the other parties that you don't most often speak about. So while I support the word more diplomatic, I think part of it should maybe just include a couple sentences on what the intent was, just as was expressed here today.
Well, maybe that would be sufficient for what I'm asking for also. It doesn't need to be extensive revision.
Okay. So do you have a first and a second on that? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So moved. All right. Moving on to administrative items number 7. 7A has been pulled, so we'll move on to 7B, the Stage 3 drought update. Mr. Hagemark.
Chair Kilborn, Commissioners, here to provide another status update on the current drought conditions. We're going to be going through the kind of a large review of drought status for the state, discuss how the community is doing with conservation. We're going to get into an update into our water supply strategy. We've now some significant changes with purchases and deliveries, and just want to walk through what that means. We're going to talk about the recycled water project status, and we're going to get into lake and reservoir operations, drought response capital project highlights. Oops, that's a typo. The urban water management plan, we're not going to be talking about that. And then water conservation program. So here's the latest from the drought monitor. I think as we discussed last time, it seems that Santa Barbara County is the epicenter of this drought. Everything kind of radiates out from there. Certainly the drought has been, continues to play a strong role, and it's been unfortunate to watch much of the state roll back their conservation efforts. And I maybe to say good for them. They have the supply now to back up a reduction, but that is not our situation. Things here remain very tight, and we continue to request the conservation remain at 35%. What we did see from here, though, is that Northern California's rainfall has been extremely helpful in the water market, but as we've talked about before, getting that water to Santa Barbara, we can only move so much water, and so that we are unable to fully take advantage of all the water they did get in Northern California, but it will be making up about a third of our supply, the water that we're able to import. So conservation for June, 36% for June, which maintains our 35% cumulative, and that goes back to Stage 3 declaration, which was May 2015. This graphic, which is also in the manager's report, just wanted to kind of summarize where our community is at. The 12-month running average is at 88 gallons per capita. in comparison to our 20 by 2020 goal, which was that's a 20% reduction is what we were looking for, and our goal was 117 gallons per capita per day. So we are clearly below that. And then you can see also in there our residential gallons per capita a day. That's what we actually have to report to the state on a monthly basis. And that is in the 60s, 65 gallons per capita per day. And that does fluctuate. As you can see, it was down around 50 this winter. So water supply strategy has been updated. You will note that there is no red showing, which we've seen for a long time now, for additional conservation and supply. We believe with our current supply strategy and water that we have secured, we have adequate water through 2018. What this graph does not show, and what I will be working on for our next meeting, is trying to show the peak demand shortages. So although we have adequate water on hand, we do have challenges next summer that we are forecasting where we will not have adequate supplies to meet those peaking demands. And we will be bringing back some options this fall to discuss how we might tackle that. We could ultimately just wait until next summer and institute, higher conservation, or we may take a preemptive approach and implement some mild regulations, maybe this winter or late fall, that might get us the savings that we need to meet those peak demands next summer. So we'll be hearing more from that. You will notice on here the recycled water. We have increased those numbers for year 5 to reflect our more positive outlook on those production. Groundwater well production this year is going to peak. We do anticipate it starting to fall off. I believe next year's groundwater production is about 400 to 500 acre feet less than this year. The supplemental water that you see there is water that we have secured. And I will add the caveat: you remember we entered into agreement to buy 4,000 acre feet of water from AVEC. That agreement has been executed by AVEC and CCWA in the city. The challenge right now is it's being held up with the Department of Water Resources, who ultimately has to approve the sale. And the challenge that they're having, and we're getting more details on it, is the exchange rate. If you might recall, we had a unbalanced exchange rate in which we borrow 4,000 acre feet and return 2,000.
Comment.
Question before we move off of groundwater, which probably did. What is the chloride situation in the coastal wells looking like?
That's a great question. We have not seen an increase in those chloride concentration. Initially, last summer, we saw an increase, but it's stabilized and we haven't seen it change. We expect, though, after the summer that we're going to see that change, because we've now have all 8 wells online, and so we anticipate seeing an increase.
Thanks.
So as far as the imported water, what DWR is hung up with apparently is other agencies, I think, got a little more greedy with the exchange rate, and it's looking more like just an outright purchase, because the return water that they have to do is so small that DWR is trying to figure out how to move forward. And so at this time, I'm not concerned that we're not going to get the 4,000 acre feet. We just may have ultimately have to have a larger return component than the 2,000 acre feet we've agreed to. So that's where the imported water status sits.
Mr. Chair? It's just been a couple months. I haven't seen the graph in a while. No state water out in 2017-18 at all.
We have that in there. I think it's very conservative, given that the reservoirs in Northern California are pretty full, that we will get something next year. That's certainly something we can take into consideration for our next update and show how that works into here. Where I think it's really going to play out is that purchased water, because that's what we'll start working on this fall, is year 8. Just creating another graph. And what we'll do is that state water allocation is going to push off our purchased water, stretch it out even further. Ultimately, we see that purchase water being able, if we do receive rains, things improve dramatically, that water being used to repay the nearly 7,000 acre-feet of water that we have now borrowed. And we also are continuing to pursue the banked water with Dudley Ridge. It's looking like that water can be returned this fall. So we don't have anything in writing yet, but we've gotten a verbal that they're interested in trying to make that happen. So supply management, I think I've already covered some of these. The conveyance limitations of 3,300 acre feet, we have been taking advantage of others' capacity in the pipeline. This over the last couple months, mainly Montecito and Carpinteria have not been importing water, and so we've been able to take advantage of that, and that is what has improved our outlook for this year. Carryover water and storage is at Kachuma is anticipated to be exhausted by December, but Kachuma is going to continue to play a role for the storage of water. And later on in my presentation, I want to go over. There is a proposal out from the Bureau on how to handle EVAP, both now and then once carryover is gone. Things are moving in a better direction. And then the groundwater peaking. But as we discussed, I think at our last meeting, we had talked about this being the meeting we potentially would need to implement some type of temporary restriction. We do not believe that it's necessary at this time. Demand management side, we have a cumulative average remains at 35%. The state regulations have kind of relaxed and allowed agencies to take on what they believe is necessary with a minimum requirement that they have a plan to have conservation in place to ensure adequate supplies for the next 3 years. As I mentioned, we do not see any need for temporary regulations this summer. However, based on continued drought conditions, there will be a need for further reduced demands for next summer, and we'll kick that off in September and start those options. So Lake Kachuma is at 13% of capacity. We expect by the time the downstream release is done, the reservoir will have dropped about 10 feet. They're releasing about 8,000 acre feet over the next 6 to 8 weeks. The barge was successfully moved on June 28th and 29th. Things went actually very smoothly, and which has kind of freed up their release to begin. Hilton Creek trout will remain in the San Ynez River watershed. This has been a discussion we've spent a lot of water, and I guess water's money, ensuring the success of Hilton Creek project, and unfortunately our desire to move those fish out of the Hilton Creek and into some type of hatchery where we can protect those fish was not supported by NMFS. And so we are working to try and come up with makeshift plans. I should say the Bureau is working to come up with makeshift plans to sustain the remaining fish in Hilton Creek now. And they have installed 4 5,000 gallon tanks that will be filled by truck multiple times a day.
Excuse me, filled from Kachuma.
From Kachuma. And the intent there is to provide refreshing flows. This is a very small volume of water now. And the Bureau continues to work with NMFS on coming up with a long-term solution. And in fact, Mr. Dahlstrom has put out what I consider one of the best solutions. He has a property located along the San Ynez River where we could locate a hatchery, move these fish to, and basically circulate water from the San Ynez River through the hatchery, which ultimately saves water and we believe would ensure the safety of the remaining population, but unfortunately we haven't gotten approval from NMFS to do that.
Mr. Chairman, so When water does get put into Hilton Creek, either by a truck or by the pipeline up till now, does that water or some portion of it actually flow back down and get into the San Ynez River where it would actually benefit the downstream users?
That's correct. In the past, anytime there's a downstream release, that counts towards the fish water release. But yes, this water ultimately ends up back in the San Ynez River when we do these fish restoration projects like this.
It seemed like even in especially dry periods like this, a lot of that water would not actually get back down to the river.
I mean, sucked up by vegetation. I mean, that's
Evapotranspiration along the way. And
I don't know that there's much of a, outside of the release, I don't know that there's much of a surface flow. It's really a subsurface flow, and, I'm sure the vegetation enjoys it.
at any rate, that's a fine splitting hair detail, but thank you.
So changes in evaporation accounting. This has been an ongoing discussion. I think we raised the flag over a year ago that the current methodology for evaporation is setting up a situation in which no one wants to keep any water in the lake, and it doesn't behoove agencies to save any water because that water would just basically evaporate. So the Bureau, the county, and the member units have been in discussion, and basically what the proposed plan is a two-part. Condition one, while Kachuma carryover water is in the lake, all lake evaporation will be split proportionally between the remaining carryover water and imported water in storage. And the intent is for it to be based on actual. What we've been seeing is that there is a significant difference between actual evaporation and calculated evaporation, because the formula that they have kind of starts to fall apart at these low lake elevations. And so there's a concurrence to move towards something that's based on actual evaporation, which makes sense. While unallocated water is remaining, that will be used to offset those evaporative losses. And basically, sometime in August, we are assuming that unallocated water, that'd be water that was either tunnel inflow or rain that fell on the lake this last winter, which was minimal. There's an account basically of that unallocated water, and that has been going to meet the evaporative losses of the lake. And once that has been exhausted, the full evaporative losses will then be put on the remaining carryover and imported water.
Mr. Chairman, when you say actual evaporative losses, does this mean a pan evaporimeter right by the side of the lake, or some calculations actually made on the lake itself?
It will be based on the pan evaporation, but the equation that they have and we're plugging it into was kind of having it fall apart. So it's going to be based on the actual surface area of the lake and be more of a, I think more of a actual accounting of it, because it was starting to get to the point where it was over exaggerating evaporation.
Yes, I'm sure you're aware there can be differences between open water evaporation on a lake and what even a pan evaporimeter right next to the side of the lake.
Yes, and it's been calibrated, but yes, certainly we start to get down to these low levels, and the lake operates very, very different. I do have to say that if there's a significant upside, the downstream release that's going on now is going to reduce the ultimate surface area of the lake, which in turn should reduce the amount of evaporation that can occur. There's a positive. Yeah, there's no evaporation. So condition 2, when carryover has been exhausted, evaporation shall be shared proportionally between the minimum pool and imported water storage. This, I think, is important because this is probably reality starting in January timeframe. And I think it gets us back to the position that we took about a year ago, which is we want to have a situation. I have no problem taking normal evaporation on the water we store in there, but it really changes the dynamics that really, I think, adds a lot more incentive to conservation and storage of water in the lake. So I think it's a much more positive place to be going forward. And so these are all things, ultimately I think we'd like to see rolled into the master contract renewal to try and address, I think, things that, to be honest with you, I mean, this is a pretty big extreme, but things that we can iron out in the future so there's more certainty. Because I think this was something that it's very difficult to plan for our community and come up with a strategy to ensure water when we don't know what the rules are. And so we're defining the rules as we go, certainly seeing where we can kind of have reasonable evaporation on that water allows us to plan for that.
Actually, I do have one question on that. So we've got the the grand jury report, and then we actually do have, which seems like isn't going to have a lot of impact, but then we have things like this that you just mentioned with the evaporation, which is something we've been dealing with and discussing for well over a year. So how do we ensure that these types of agreements that we're coming to now are actually put into the contract that's going forward? I mean, is this something we should put in the grand jury report? Would that be helpful?
I don't think it really belongs in the grand jury report, and certainly since the Bureau is writing the rules right now, this is going to be it will be included. I don't think we need to state it, and I really, like you mentioned, I don't think the grand jury, it's really to put it in there, but I don't think it'll be lost. Okay. I think it'll be fresh in our minds that, how do we operate this lake when it gets down to these extremes? What is a way that, I think going back to our point, how do we continue to set up and operate the reservoir such that we're encouraging people to conserve, to explore different options that actually they're not punished for having that water in the lake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I just appreciate the work that you and staff and the rest of the member units have gone through to make these agreements, and don't want them to be lost going forward.
So just wanted to give a little summary. Again, I apologize for the quality of the scan, but it's just showing what's remaining. You see the small chunk of unallocated water at the very top there. That's the water we expect it is actually being hit with evaporation. That's what's taking the evaporation right now for the lake, and we expect that to be exhausted in early August. Carryover water, the city owns about 2,300 acre-feet of that. So we are one of the larger shareholders of that water. And so we're going to see some pretty significant evaporation starting in late August, September on. And so we anticipate that water getting hit pretty hard. We have this light blue line right here is the imported water. That's the imported water in storage. I want to say the majority of that is Goleta. They have exhausted, I believe, they just have like 700 acre-feet of carryover and have been stockpiling imported water there. And then the BNA, ANA account, that's the below Narrows and above Narrows account, and that is the water that's currently being released. As we've talked about in the past, and this goes back to that bank rain discussion, that's how much water they have on the books, but every day that they release, they get more water that's water flowing out of the sediment or dewatered portions of the reservoir. And so we anticipate that potentially could grow by about 1,000 acre-feet by the time the release is done, and that's why I think they're targeting something above 8,000 acre-feet of a release, even though they currently have 7,800 on the books.
And that's the so-called bank storage.
That's the bank storage, yeah. And then minimum pool. All right. I brought this graphic back just because it seems to tell an interesting story, and you can see when we declared our stage 1, 2, and 3, and as it compares to the last drought in the 90s. And of course, here's when that miracle month of March hit, and we missed that. And what we're going to see now is it dropping off fairly rapidly with the summer demand and downstream release. But hopefully year 2 will come around. We'll take this next one if it comes. Got this, continue to get just wonderful photos from Bill Dewey. I want to give recognition to a local photographer who enjoys flying around our great county and taking pictures, and he's provided some great pictures that I think help illustrate just how low the lake is. And you can see the intake tower way over here that used to be gravity fed. And this is where the barge was originally, and here's where the barge is now. And you can see basically this pipeline that runs all the way over there. The distance between Site 1 and Site 2 is about 6,000 feet that was added, and I believe Site 1 to the tower was 3. So it's roughly around close to 10,000 linear feet of pipeline that now is our lifeline to moving water to the South Coast. Drought response capitals, as I'd mentioned, we have all 8 potable groundwater wells are in production. I don't think I've had a chance to say that over the last 2 years. It's been very frustrating chasing all the challenges with our groundwater wells, but they are in production, and we've made a lot of improvements to them, so hopefully we'll get a good solid run out of them. We continue to monitor seawater intrusion. We have not seen a significant change from last summer, but we expect it to change by the end of the summer. Desal project update. It was an item on the agenda, and unfortunately we had some new information come in on Tuesday at our meeting with them, and so we're going to come back for more discussion on that. But basically, the on-site work, the treatment trains have been delivered to the site. Plumbing and electrical is ongoing, basically to tie it all together. Scheduled to begin work offshore, that's next week. This is something that we've been waiting to get the green light on. This has not been the Coastal Commission has not been the issue here. It was basically, I looked to IDE. They've taken a long time to put together their anchoring plan, and unfortunately, waited towards the end to do it. So this work is anticipated to get kicked off. They do have most of the materials that they need. Contaminated soils continues to be ongoing and is some of the cost increases that we're going to be looking at in the coming weeks. Schedule, we are looking at a delay from the October startup. At this point, we don't have a firm date, but I do have several meetings set up next week with the higher-ups at IDE, and we're going to be trying to see if we can't nail down what exactly those changes are. One of the issues that's currently in play is they're called transition pieces. So as we've discussed before, there's an high-density polyethylene line that runs out to our intakes. But along that way, there are fittings. They are fiberglass fittings that they use to transition the communication and electrical line in and out of that pipeline, because ultimately it travels inside the pipeline to get to the pumps at the very end. When we were pressure testing those at just 50 psi, the one on shore exploded. And unfortunately, they're very custom pieces, and so that is what we are working right now to try and figure out how to replace, and there are 4 of them. So,
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. What does that line go to? Sensors that are at the offshore end of the...
They're both communication and electrical. So it's the electrical that runs the pumps in the ocean and the communication line that goes out there, all transition in and out of the pipeline as it goes out to the ocean. So here's a aerial of the 3 treatment trains. And if you may recall, each of these treatment trains are made up of 7 basically shipping container-sized units that were built off-site, and it made it even possible for us to consider the schedule that we're currently on. And so you can kind of see this shows up. These units right here, these are the media tanks. This is basically very similar to surface water treatment. This is gravel, anthracite, sand that pulls out the particles in the seawater, so that once they're passed through here, all we have is salt water. And then you can see in here is basically the pumps, and then these are the RO membranes that'll actually remove the salt.
Is that 7 of them that we're looking at, or is that 3?
Each one of these treatment trains is made up of 7 units, and that's what right now they're tying all those units back together again. And so that's why it comes in 21 pieces and makes 3 units. Each one of these skids is just over 1,000 acre-feet. We do have the capabilities at a later time to expand them up to a full production of 1,250 acre-feet per skid. You can see some of the equipment in the background that we are using from the last facility. This is to do with filter press, some of the tanks we used before. And what you don't see right here is the admin building and control building, which are potential planning to use again too.
Mr. Chairman, where can we get back to that?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular part of the facility that has the contaminated soil that we're worried about, or just anywhere we dig turns out it's there?
The entire site is contaminated at this point, and so what we've decided to do is remove it where we're going to be. But in the future, when we plan to expand this facility, if we expand it, we'll have additional contaminated soils we'll need to deal with. So it's going to continue to haunt us, and unfortunately, there's no easy solution to it. It's not something that's going to decay over time. And it's just a picture of the Weir box. This is actually one of the places where one of those fiberglass fittings exists that transitions the communication and electrical from outside of the pipe into the pipe, because it runs inside of the intake pipe all the way out, and right before it gets to the pumps, there's another one of these transition pieces where all the communication and electrical come out and then tie into the various pumps and motors. So update on the discussions with Montecito. We continue to work on just the, we've called the funding agreement, but basically it's a reimbursement agreement for the costs of negotiating. And unfortunately, we've been in discussion since May on just that part, which doesn't bode well for a water sales agreement if you can't even agree to the basic stuff. So we did receive a response back from Montecito in June, and we have been busy with many other things, and so staff is trying to get back to this. Our goal is to try and get something to council by August 9th, but it'll depend on how significant whether we can agree to the changes that Montecito has asked for. Recycled water. So good news on this. The plant has been able to meet demands without blending of potable water. Demands have remained low due to the cooler weather, which has been helpful. We continue to work with our environmental engineering firm who specializes in membrane filtration. They have come up with numerous recommendations for how we could optimize the plant production. We continue to test the facility, but yet we have not found the outer limits of what it can produce. Our goal is to ensure that it produces at least 1.5 million. As we get into August, we expect it to start to push up against that. And we have yet to turn on Val Verde, but we have that additional supply available too if demands are that high. But we do anticipate we should be able to get through. We've been working with the Montecito Country Club. They have made concessions on their planting, pushing a lot of it off into fall. And so we do appreciate their efforts to work with us on that. But our next step, and I was actually hoping to have this ready today, but was able to get the contracts and everything pulled together, is to return to council to amend that contract. We got an initial contract with that firm for it was under $35,000, and we need to increase that to continue to have their support moving forward. And right now they've been focused on this summer, but we want to transition with that with them to start talking about what's it going to take long term to get this facility up to the 2.5 MGD, which is the criteria based on our current secondary water quality. And then ultimately, once we've made those secondary changes, the facility should treat 3 MGD is the end game.
Question on that one. So the reason we need this contractor is because the filters it's not working as we expected. So is there any repercussions for the contractor? Are they the ones paying for this? The original contractor, are they the ones paying for this new optimization process, or is there any ramifications for them, or are
they have had a change of heart, and they are now trying to help. In particular, that one of their subs we actually need, because of the programming of this, we have to change the programming, and we're basically directing their sub to do the changes in the programming. And so we are working with. It has been more collaborative than it's been in the past to resolve this issue.
I guess I'm kind of thinking cost-wise. I mean, is this something that we've accounted for in current rates, or is this something we're going to have to account for in future year rates?
We're going to have to address this in future rates. Certainly, we are going to be pursuing reimbursement for damages. We just don't know what those damages are at this time, and or who's responsible. Those are yet to be resolved, and to be honest with you, we're really focused on meeting our current demands, and once we've gotten to that point, then we feel like we can take a step back and start to go after, making the city whole at the end of the day.
Thank you.
And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ward, who, by the way, is our new water conservation supervisor as of July 1st, a position that we have sorely needed for a long time. And we're glad to finally have that approved in the budget. And so anyway, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. So members of the commission, I wanted to share with you Smart Irrigation Month, which is the month of July. This is a nationwide campaign from the Irrigation Association. And as temperatures increase and irrigation increases during the summer, we want to draw attention to the importance of using water efficiently and increase public awareness about simple practices and innovative technologies that homeowners and businesses can use to reduce irrigation waste. So it's estimated that as much as 50% of water used outdoors is wasted from inefficient watering systems and methods. Basically, when your irrigation system applies more water than your plants and soil can absorb, that water's wasted. Here in Santa Barbara, a typical landscape needs about 2 feet of irrigation water applied per year, and most people apply 5 feet, so they're overwatering by more than twice as much. And over the year, plants' water needs change as the seasons and the weather changes. So plants need peak watering in the summer months, right here, when the when the days are longer, the evaporation is higher, and as the weather changes and the seasons change, we call these our shoulder months, which is the spring and the fall. You can see it dramatically drops off. The days get shorter, they get cooler. We generally get precipitation in the winter, so most plants do not need water at all in the winter. They can get it all from rain. And since the weather and the climates are changing for the plants, as you can see, most people will need to constantly adjust how much water they are applying to their plants. So if you compare January, this mouse is not coordinating. Okay, January to June gloom to mid-August, you can see that it will need constant adjustment. So the blue line shows a irrigation controller that's adjusted twice per year. But what we often find is that people do not adjust their controller at all over the entire year. So this would be a flat blue line. The green line is a controller that's adjusted weekly based on the weather, and that's correct watering. So anything between these two lines is the overwatering and the waste. So how can you easily adjust your controller? Well, there is a wonderful feature called the watering percent adjust that allows you to adjust the watering in one easy step on your controller. So there should be a feature called either water budget or a little percent sign or seasonal adjust. And that can be bumped up or bumped down to match the percentage that we post on our website each week. So the watering percent adjust is a percentage of the maximum amount of water that you would apply on your landscape in July or August when temperatures are high, rainfall is scarce, and the days are long and hot. It's updated weekly on our website using data collected from local weather stations, and we also post it on Twitter every week as well. So as new watering percent adjust values fluctuate over the year and over the week, the controller's percentage adjust feature should be set to match that for the perfect amount of efficient watering. Weekly is what we recommend, but at least monthly will get you pretty close to the plant's water needs. And the city is here to help people better understand this concept. We have free water checkups for both homes and businesses where we show them how to find their percent adjust on their controller, how to adjust it, and to show them what it does to their controller. Basically, that one simple step will make all of your run times either shorter or longer. So you don't have to go through program A, program B, and adjust every single start time. It just does it very quickly for you. We also have do-it-yourself videos on YouTube that go through this whole program, as well as quite a few other great irrigation do-it-yourself videos. And we have a rebate for smart irrigation controllers. This is a sprinkler timer that will adjust itself based on the weather, and that's either through satellite data or an on-site weather station. These are great controllers, but they are recommended for larger landscapes or someone that's very technologically savvy because they do still need some hands-on work. What we like to say is that there's no sprinkler timer that's a set it and forget it type of device. These do need a lot of adjustment for them to stay efficient. Some more information on all of these programs can be found at santabarbaraca.gov/waterwise. And we're here for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the commission? All right. I will say I'm looking forward to see what the peaking water supply graph is going to look like next time we meet. So hopefully there's a way to depict that graphically that looks nice and makes sense. Okay, moving on to item number 8, Water Resources Manager's Report. Mr. Hagmark.
All right. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to get this digitally so we could put it up. I apologize to the audience. But it is just a summary of updated months end for June. What I do want to highlight for the commission is the groundwater production for May and June have both exceeded what we had planned, which is part of, again, every little bit helps, but it's been part of why we're not currently having to consider additional restrictions. So this, in combination with, you'll notice, state water, we've been able to leverage additional state water, and you'll notice that our use of Kachuma water is actually was zero because we're basically been able to bring in enough state water to meet those demands. And then you'll also notice the blend water numbers for recycled water is 0, meaning we are using 100% recycled water in our system. Okay. And then I'm going to skip to, what's the other one? I skip to El Estero. It's on the second to last page. Just noting kind of consider more of our new normal. 6 MGD is what we're seeing on average for the month of June, and kind of benchmark of where we are with conservation. And then on the backside of that, we were looking at our SSO events. Thus far, we have had 4. We're doing really good. Our goal this year is 8. And just to remind the commission, our consent decree ends May 31st of 2017. So we are in the last fiscal year of the consent decree. And then as far as the pass-through operations,
Chair, I have a question about that. So can you talk at all about the comments that were made at council on Tuesday and what our stance is or what our strategy is? Does it just go another year and actually end? Is it really not going to end? Does it have potential to be going back into litigation?
Ms. Connect, the deputy city attorney, is here. If she probably expand on that.
Commissioner Jordan, if you don't mind, Sarah Connect, Assistant City Attorney. I would just like to say that we're in meet and confer with Channel Keeper right now over the consent decree. We are considering Channel Keeper's position on their request to extend the consent decree. As you know, the consent decree has a termination date of March 31st, 2017. We feel we've complied with the consent decree. We've worked very hard to meet the spill goals, their goals. We have, done everything. We've worked very hard to comply. They have initiated dispute resolution. That's what's triggered this meet and confer obligation. We met on Monday. We had a good discussion, but they have so to speak laid down the gauntlet. Right. We're in discussions. We haven't resolved that yet. Okay. So
the best part I wanted to hear there was, when you hear things at public comment, it's all one-sided, and then everybody shushes up because you can't discuss it. But I thank you for being here today, because really what I want to hear publicly is our stance is that we feel we've complied. So thank you.
Yeah, we do. There are things, and we're willing to work this next year to correct those things that need correcting. And we're not saying that it's perfect. We haven't met the spill goals. It's a very hard system to work. Understood. And there's been many challenges, and we readily admit that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then as far as the pass-through agreement, we are still waiting for the Bureau to final the environmental assessment. They have communicated that they're going to try and finish that in August. So hopefully they can finish that, and we can. We've also initiated. We're trying to get a proposal, a scope of work from Stetson to have them support the modifications to the Bureau's accounting method, because the Bureau has a very sophisticated model that allocates water every month, evaporation, inflows, and so that accounting method will need to be modified to recognize pass-through. Is there any other questions? I have currently proposed a cancellation. Oh, go ahead.
With regard to our Kachuma plot, I assume that was not updated to show the past week, or has it actually started dropping the way you sort of sketched the way it would start to fall off the cliff there?
This graphic, I believe, is not reflect that. This is as the end of June 30th, so they'd started their release on July 12th. Okay. So we'll start to see that in September. We'll see the gravity of that.
Thank you.
And you'll. I've also, proposed a cancellation of August Water Commission meeting. City Council, as you know, goes dark for about three weeks in August, and at this time, I don't have any pressing issues to bring back to the Water Commission unless there's something the commissioners or chair would like to propose.
I don't think so. Like you said, the a response to the grand juries had to be in before we would meet again anyway. So I guess as long as you send us a copy of the updated responses
Yes.
before you send it to council. Okay, so next meeting is Thursday, September 15th. See you there. Meeting adjourned.